My name is Cynthia Reynolds, and I have written 12 children's books and a half a dozen histories. And today I'm reading F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby, which was published in 1925, and a Baptist college in Charleston, South Carolina in 1987 objected to the language and sexual content of this book. This is chapter 3. There was music from my neighbor's house through the summer nights. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings of champagne and stars. At high tide in the afternoon, I watched his guests diving from the tower of his raft or taking the sun on the hot sand of his beach, while his 2 motorboats slit the waters of the Sound, drawing aquaplanes over cataracts of foam. On weekends, his Rolls-Royce became an omnibus, bearing parties to and from the city between 9 in the morning and long past midnight, while his station wagon scampered like a brisk yellow bug to meet all trains. And on Mondays, 8 servants, including an extra gardener, toiled all day with mops and scrubbing brushes and hammers and garden shears, repairing the ravages of the night before. Every Friday, 5 crates of oranges and lemons arrived from a fruiterer in New York. Every Monday, those same oranges and lemons left his back door in a pyramid of hopeless halves. There was a machine in the kitchen which could extract the juice of 200 oranges an hour if the little button was pressed 200 times by a butler's thumb. At least once a fortnight, a crop of caterers came down with several hundred feet of canvas and enough colored lights to make a Christmas tree of Gatsby's enormous garden. On buffet tables garnished with glistening hors d'oeuvres, spiced baked hams crowded against salads of harlequin designs, and pastry pigs and turkeys bewitched to a dark golden. In the main hall, a bar with a real brass rail was set up and stocked with gin and liquors and cordials so long forgotten that most of his female guests were too young to know one from another. By 7 o'clock, the orchestra has arrived. No thin 5-piece affair, but a whole pit full of oboes and trombones and saxophones and viols and cornets and piccolos and low and high drums. The last swimmers have come in from the beach now and are dressed upstairs. The cars from New York are parked 5 deep in the drive, and already the halls and salons and verandas are gaudy with primary colors, and hair shorn in strange new ways, and shawls beyond the dreams of Castile. The bars in full swing, and floating rounds of cocktails permeate the garden outside, until the air is alive with chatter and laughter, and casual innuendo, and introductions forgotten on the spot, and enthusiastic meetings between women who never knew each other's names. The lights grow brighter as the earth lurches away from the sun, and now the orchestra is playing yellow cocktail music, and the opera of voices pitches a key higher. Laughter is easier minute by minute, spilling with prodigality, tipped out at a cheerful word. The groups change more swiftly, swell with new arrivals, dissolve and foam in the same breath. Already there are wanderers, confident girls who wander here and there among the stouter and more stable, become for a sharp, joyous moment the center of a group, and then excited with triumph glide on through the sea and change of faces and voices and colors. Suddenly one of these gypsies is trembling in opals, seizing a cocktail out of the air. She dumps it down for courage and, moving her hands like Frisco, dances out alone on the canvas platform. A momentary hush. The orchestra leader varies his rhythm obligingly for her, and there's a burst of chatter as the enormous news goes around that she is Gilda Gray's understudy from the Follies. A party has begun. I believe that on the first night I went to Gatsby's house, I was one of the few guests who actually had been invited. People were not invited, they went there. They got into automobiles which bore them out to Long Island, and somehow they ended up at Gatsby's door. Once there, they were introduced by somebody who knew Gatsby, and after that they conducted themselves according to the rules of behavior associated with an amusement park. Sometimes they came and went without having met Gatsby at all, came for a party with a simplicity of heart that was its own ticket for admission. I had actually been invited. A chauffeur in a uniform of robin's egg blue crossed my lawn early that Saturday morning with a surprisingly formal note from his employer. The honor would be entirely Gatsby's, it said, if I would attend his little party that night. He had seen me several times and had intended to call on me long before, but a peculiar combination of circumstances had prevented it. Signed, J. Gatsby, in a majestic hand. Dressed in white flannels, I went over to his lawn a little after 7 and wandered around rather ill at ease among the swirls and eddies of people I didn't know, though here and there was a face I had noticed on the commuting train. I was immediately struck by a number of young Englishmen dressed well, all looking a little hungry, and all talking in low, earnest voices to solid and prosperous Americans. As soon as I arrived, I made an attempt to find my host, but the 2 or 3 people of whom I asked his whereabouts stared at me in such an amazed way and denied so vehemently any knowledge of his movements that I slunk off in the direction of the cocktail table, the only place in the garden where a single man could linger without looking purposeless and alone. I was on my way to getting roaring drunk from sheer embarrassment when Jordan Baker came out of the house and stood at the head of the marble stairs, leaning a little backward and looking with contemptuous interest down at the garden. Welcome or not, I found it necessary to detach myself in some way before I should begin to address cordial remarks to passers-by. "Hello," I roared, advancing towards her. My voice seemed unnaturally loud above the garden. "Do you attend these parties often?" inquired Jordan of the girl beside her as she held her hand, as if to tell me that she would pay attention to me soon afterwards. "The last was the one I met you at," answered the girl in an alert, confident voice. She turned to her companion. "Wasn't it for you, Lucille?" "It was for Lucille, too." "I like to come," Lucille said. "I never care what I do, so I always have a grand time. When I was here last, I tore my gown on a chair, and he asked me my name and address. Inside of a week, I got a package from Courier's with a new evening gown in it." "Did you keep it?" asked Jordan. "Sure I did. I was going to wear it tonight, but it was too big in the bust and had to be altered. It was gas blue with lavender beads. $265. "There's something funny about a fellow that'll do a thing like that," said the other girl eagerly. "He doesn't want any trouble with anybody." "Who doesn't?" I inquired. "Gatsby. Somebody told me." The 2 girls and Jordan leaned together confidentially. "Someone told me they thought he killed a man once." A thrill passed over all of us. The 3 Mr. Mumbles bent forward and listened eagerly. "I don't think it's so much that," argued Lucille skeptically. "It's more that he was a German spy during the war." One of the men nodded in confirmation. "I heard that from a man who knew all about him, grew up with him in Germany," he assured us positively. "Oh, no," said the first girl. "It couldn't be that because he was in the American Army during the war." As our credulity switched back to her, she leaned forward with enthusiasm. "You look at him sometimes when he thinks nobody's looking. I'll bet he killed a man." She narrowed her eyes and shivered. Lucille shivered. We all turned and looked for Gatsby. It was testimony to the romantic speculation he inspired that there were whispers about him from those who had found little that was necessary to whisper about in this world. The first supper, there would be another one after midnight, was now being served, and Jordan invited me to join our own party, who were spread around a table on the other side of the garden. There were 3 married couples and Jordan's escort, a persistent undergraduate given to violent innuendo, and obviously under the impression that sooner or later Jordan was going to yield herself to him. Instead of rambling, this party had preserved a dignified homogeneity and assumed to itself the function of representing the nobility of the countryside. "Let's get out," whispered Jordan after a somewhat wasteful and inappropriate half-hour. "This is much too polite for me." We got up, and she explained we were going to find the host. I had never met him, she said, and it was making me uneasy. The undergraduate nodded in a cynical, melancholy way. The bar, where we glanced first, was crowded, but Gatsby was not there. She couldn't find him from the top of the steps, and he wasn't on the veranda. On a chance, we tried an important-looking door and walked into a high Gothic library, paneled with a carved English oak and probably transported complete from some ruin overseas. A stout, middle-aged man with enormous owl-eyed spectacles was sitting somewhat drunk on the edge of a great table, staring with unsteady concentration at the shelves of books. As we entered, he wheeled excitedly around and examined Jordan from head to foot. "What do you think?" he demanded impetuously. "About what?" He waved his hand toward the bookshelves. "About that. As a matter of fact, you needn't bother to ascertain. I ascertained. They are real." "The books?" He nodded. "Absolutely real. They have pages and everything. I thought they'd be a nice, durable cardboard. Matter of fact, they're absolutely real. Pages and everything." "You told us." We shook hands with him bravely and went back outdoors. There was dancing now on the canvas of the garden, old men pushing young girls backwards in eternal graceless circles, superior couples holding each other tortuously, fashionably and in keeping in the corners, and a great number of single girls dancing individualistically, or relieving the orchestra for a moment of the burden of a banjo or the traps. By midnight, the hilarity had increased. I was still with Jordan Baker. We were sitting at a table with a man about my age and a rowdy little girl who gave way upon the slightest provocation to uncontrollable laughter. I was enjoying myself now. I had taken 2 fingerbowls of champagne, and the scene had changed before my eyes into something significant, elemental, profound. At a lull in the entertainment, the man looked at me and smiled. "Your face is familiar," he said politely. "Weren't you in the 3rd Division during the war?" "Why, yes, I was in the 9th Machine Gun Battalion." "I was in the 7th Infantry until June 1918. I knew I'd seen you somewhere before." We talked for a moment about some wet, gray little villages in France. Evidently he lived in this vicinity, for he told me he had just bought a hydroplane and was going to try it out in the morning. "Want to go with me, old sport?" "Just near the shore along the Sound." "What time?" "Any time that suits you." It was on the tip of my tongue to ask his name when Jordan looked around and smiled. "Having a gay time now?" she inquired. "Much better." I turned again to my new acquaintance. "This is an unusual party for me. I haven't even seen the host. I live over there." I waved my hand at the invisible hedge in the distance, and this man Gatsby sent over his chauffeur with an invitation. For a moment he looked at me as if he failed to understand. "I'm Gatsby," he said suddenly. "What?" I exclaimed. "Oh, I beg your pardon." "I thought you knew, old sport. I'm afraid I'm not a very good host." He smiled understandingly, much more than understandingly. It was one of those rare smiles with a quality of eternal reassurance in it that you might come across 4 or 5 times in life. It faced or seemed to face the whole external world for an instant, and then concentrated on you with an irresistible prejudice in your favor. It understood you just as far as you wanted to be understood, believed in you as you would like to believe in yourself, and assured you that it had precisely the impression of you that at your best you hoped to convey. Precisely at that point it vanished, and I was looking at an elegant young roughneck, a year or 2 over 30, whose elaborate formality of speech just missed being absurd. Some time before he introduced himself, I'd gotten the strong impression he was picking his words with care.